because we've just received a statement from the Sun newspaper in response to that one. And this is what it says. We have reported a story about two very concerned parents who made a complaint to the BBC about the behaviour of a presenter and the welfare of their child. Their complaint was not acted upon by the BBC. We have seen evidence that supports their concerns. It is now for the BBC to properly investigate. Joining me in the studio, former BBC political editor Michael Quick. Michael, thank you very much indeed for coming. And while you've been sitting here, it seems as if the story has been moving on in leaps and bounds. I don't know if it's any clearer to you what's actually going on, or whether it's less clear as mud, possibly.
Well, what seems to have happened really this afternoon, in these two developments this afternoon, is that the focus was on the BBC and whether they'd behaved properly, and of course on this presenter. And now it looks like the focus is actually on the Sun newspaper, because the lawyer for the actual young man concerned is saying that they complained to the Sun. They made it clear that the proposed story was a load of rubbish, essentially. Totally, I think the word was totally untrue.
Rubbish, yes, rubbish. I think it was rubbish.
Well, I mean, the Sun statement that you've just read out doesn't really address that. It carries on with the focus on the BBC. I think if I was in the BBC management block tonight, I'd be... well, I wouldn't exactly be relieved, but I would feel the pressure's off a bit, particularly taken in conjunction with the statement from the Metropolitan Police that at this stage they are not investigating, which rather suggests to me that they're not yet convinced that any laws were broken. Now, none of this, we've heard all of this, but still, there does seem to have been, it's a strong chance of that there was that this BBC presenter acted very stupidly.
Yeah.
And the details of that may come out. I mean, all along, I felt that we've only had fragments of the true story. That we've only been, and all along, I felt that this idea of paying £35,000 just for some pornographic photos. Well, I'm not in the habit of buying pornographic photos, but I would have thought they were a lot cheaper than that.
Well, if you were, I think you'd find that they're free. A great many of them are free, and you don't need to part with any money for them. I mean, the story has been very peculiar in very many ways, hasn't it? Because there's been a great deal of fuss and bother about it, but it all does seem to boil down to whether or not this young man was 17 when first these photos of him and these performances of him were viewed and asked for and revealed, or whether actually he was 18, because if he was 18, there's nothing to see legally here. Then there's the question of the kind of dichotomy or the gulf, the chasm between what the person, the presenter, the highly paid presenter, the household name, projects him or herself to be, and then what this person's life really and truly is, as evidenced by requesting pornographic photographs and performances from a very young person. I don't know whether that's a thing or not. I don't know. People's proclivities are very often very different from what the sorts of things that they project on television or the radio, aren't they?
Yeah. I mean, on the age issue.
Yes.
I mean, if well, there's two issues, aren't there? Really. One is, was the young man 17 at the time of the first contact? And that is easily provable by birth certificate or whatever.
Yeah.
And second, whether the BBC presenter had good reason to think that they were 18 or older. And there are certain online platform. I'm not really familiar with this world.
I think OnlyFans is the one that's been suggested, and it's supposed to be that if somebody's showing their wares on OnlyFans, they're over 18.
Exactly.
So you would say that you could say or could argue or suggest that OnlyFans is the business with the responsibility to find out how old the person is or how young.
Indeed.
And that if the BBC presenter was simply using OnlyFans, he or she would have the right to expect the person to be over 18.
No, but the other issue that, I go back to this whole thing, the onus is now on the Sun newspaper. And frankly, that statement wasn't good enough. They have to answer the allegation made by the lawyer on behalf of the young man of why they went ahead with this story. When was it? Saturday morning? Went ahead with that story when the young man and his lawyer said it was total rubbish.
I suppose the parents have argued very movingly that this young man is a chronic crack addict whose life is in danger, that he's so deeply addicted to crack that he's used £35,000 of this well-known household name's money to buy, and you can buy a lot of crack for £35,000, an awful lot. I don't regularly purchase it, but I gather that it's not that expensive.
You don't purchase it at all?
No, I don't. But 35,000 quid, I imagine, would get you quite a ton of crack.
Yeah.
So maybe the suggestion by the Sun is that this young person is not really in a fit state to tell his story cogently to a lawyer or to be relied upon. Maybe he's so addicted and so badly affected that he's not really somebody that's reliable. It could be that.
On the other hand, to go ahead with the story when the person who was closest to the experience denies it, I would have thought is a very dangerous thing to do journalistically. And it may be the reason, or it may be the other reasons, why the Sun newspaper has never named the BBC person concerned. But it does seem to me there's been a significant shift of the focus in the last few minutes. Now, it may shift back again.
Yes.
But I think the Sun is going to have to come up with a supplementary statement.
I mean, there is a possibility, isn't there, now, that the BBC may be seen to have acted with all due propriety and in the right way, not to rush to suspend somebody, not to name them, just to be very, very careful and subtle about all of this, to protect someone's privacy and to look into a story that may not be true at all.
And it may well be that the BBC were under the impression that this young man was 18 throughout, and that they then said to the presenter, well, look, we don't think any laws have been broken here, but we do think we've behaved very stupidly and potentially could cause enormous damage to the BBC's reputation and your reputation, and they may have dealt with it in that way. But I mean, a lot of what we're both saying here is huge speculation.
What's difficult about all of this, really, apart from everything else, is the genie already out of the bottle of social media. So you have so many people confidently asserting that they know who the person is. You have people like Rylan Clark, Nikki Campbell, Gary Lineker, Jeremy Vine saying, well, it's not me. It isn't me. And, you know, woe betide you if you say it is. And actually you can be sued for alleging it, suggesting it, making tweets about it, you know, and lots of people who know nothing about it at all wading in, and lots of reputations hanging in the balance very probably unfairly.
I know, and everyone that comes out and denies it, that narrows the pool of potentials. And, of course, people will be observing who appears on screen or on the radio. And as I understand it, BBC managers are deeply frustrated that the person themselves hasn't come out and issued a statement.
Have you heard this?
I have heard that, but yes, I have heard that.
OK, well, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
How could it be that a very troubled young man who is or is not, but is said by his own parents to be a really seriously ill crack addict, can afford, out of nowhere, a very expensive, internationally known firm of solicitors? How would that come about? Who would be the person providing this young man with that sort of legal team and backup, do you reckon? And I know this is surmising, but what do you think?
Well, I suppose it could be the BBC presenter.
Could be
it
the
not?
presenter.
Because we know, do we not, that he has made one payment of £1,000 since the complaint was made.
Right.
I think that's been reported, hasn't it? But on the other hand, for them to carry on getting involved in that way could make their situation worse. I mean, I think, you know, I mean, maybe they haven't spent all the £35,000.
Although the parents say they have. The parents say they have spent the whole thing. But, you know, but is there any suggestion at all? Is it utterly outrageous or ludicrous to suggest that there's a possibility that the BBC might have funded that? Is that a thing?
I don't think so.
So
I think the BBC would be getting itself into potential hot water there if they were to be seen to be employing lawyers on behalf of somebody who had a serious drug problem and who I just think it would be.
And to receive £35,000
The BBC is one of the most cautious institutions on the planet.
Right.
I just don't think they would have gone down that avenue.
Right. So this very expensive team of lawyers, we think might have been paid for by the presenter.
Well, I think that's got to be a possibility, hasn't it?
Yes, I would imagine so.
And it's a good question that you asked. How did they? I mean, it's possible, I suppose, that the team of lawyers feel a terrible injustice has been done here, and that they did it for nothing, pro bono.
Pro bono.
That occasionally happens, or there may be some personal contact, or the young man may have other sources of income. Who knows?
I mean, the whole story is, I mean, I suppose people are intrigued by it. People feel that this particular individual is paid for by licence fee payers, and therefore it's them, and therefore everyone has a stake in it. People feel and have been told that this is a household name, a kind of well-known person, that there wouldn't be a household in Britain where you show a photograph of this person and they wouldn't know who it was. They'd know immediately who it was. So obviously there's a prurient, nosy, tittle-tattly interest in it. But is it a deeper issue? Is it more significant? Are we, in inverted commas, entitled to feel that we must know and we must be told who it is and what exactly happened? Or is it the kind of thing that could just fade away?
I think we are sort of entitled, and I think this would apply to ITV as well. Of course, they've had their own problems recently, in that if it's not sorted out, then the public, the viewers, are going to have doubts about everybody that they see on screen.
Yes.
And it will contaminate the pool of people. And so we do need, in the end, to know exactly what happened, what exactly the presenter did. Did they break any laws, or were they just stupid? Were they stupid to a degree that affects their credibility and their reputation? And so we have, at the end of the day, we do have to get to the bottom of this.
Well, Will, do you think there'll be
I think we probably will.
Will there be some people, Michael, though, who argue that if the presenter didn't break the law, the presenter hasn't done anything stupid? All the presenter's done is a perfectly acceptable, perfectly legal thing that he or she likes to do, and there's nothing stupid about it. It's perfectly fine. You can pay whoever you like to show you naked pictures, provided you're not breaking the law. And what's wrong with that?
I certainly think BBC managers will regard them as being incredibly reckless in their behaviour.
Right.
And to an extent that could and is actually causing the BBC reputation.
Well, we both hail from the BBC, and I was there for the better part of 30 years, and I remember my numerous contracts over that time. And when in signing a contract, you had to undertake not to bring the BBC into disrepute.
Indeed.
However, I suppose the question is, if looking at pictures of an 18-year-old boy is legal and you're not breaking the law, then how can you be said to be bringing the BBC into disrepute? It's just your sexual preference, and you're not breaking the law. Why shouldn't you do it?
There are all sorts of things in this world, Vanessa, that you could do which are legal.
Yes.
Which, if you are a senior or you are a presenter within an institution, it's known that you do them, and nonetheless would make you. Would undermine your credibility, I think.
I suppose you could say in this instance, not least the idea that you become the news, and that's always an issue with anybody of any prominence in any institution, isn't it? When the story becomes about that person rather than about whatever it is they're presenting, that kind of shift in emphasis is precisely what you don't want in an organisation which is about clear communication and supposedly unbiased communication of the news, is it?
No. And the problem for the BBC is that it's had a number of scandals over the years which it has not handled well. I mean, the two biggest have been the Savile scandal, Jimmy Savile scandal of about 10 years ago. More recently, although it dates back further, the Martin Bashir scandal over the Diana interview, and in both cases, management failed to follow up complaints or allegations that were floating around. And this looked like it might be another of those. It's looking slightly less like one of those tonight.
Right.
And therefore the inevitable question is: has the BBC sorted itself out, or is there some inherent problem within the BBC that means that these things happen again and again. I think, to a degree, the BBC probably has sorted itself out, but we're not yet clear whether they were culpable in any way with this one, or they were just operating in
the right kind of way, a professional way. Yes.
In a professional way. And you've got to remember also, the BBC has a duty of care to its staff, and that is a factor that's often left out of these considerations.